Welcome to Caregiver Guild. This module contains 3 videos and 2 journal worksheets. Although guilt is a complicated emotion and one that is frequently experienced by most caregivers, it might not be an appropriate response to most situations.
By becoming aware of the situations that make you feel guilty, it will help you distinguish between feelings that are being self-imposed and feelings that are being imposed upon you by a guilt tripper. And this is the best part. You will discover how changing just one word in your vocabulary can change the way you react to guilt. We're excited to share this with you because it has helped thousands of other caregivers, and we believe that making this one simple adjustment can set you free from this cruel and controlling emotion.
So here are the steps. Watch the first 2 videos, Madelyn leaves Quentin home alone, and guilt, what a trip. Then complete the first 2 steps of creative indifference, which are awareness and acceptance. After that, watch the 3rd video, guilt, get lost, you big bully, and then complete the action steps on the journal worksheet.
Caregivers often tell us that when they change the way they respond to guilt, they feel like they've been let out of prison. It takes some practice and a willingness to let go of some old patterns and habits, but we think you'll find that the emotional freedom is well worth the effort.
So when you're ready, let's get started.
She wrote this letter about guilt on their 56th wedding anniversary. It fell on a Sunday. And she knew that there were going to be a lot of former ministers and members at church that Sunday. There was going to be special music, and she was quite certain that they were going to have a cake and a celebration for their anniversary in the basement afterward. But at this point, my dad was not sleeping at night, which meant she was not sleeping at night. And she was absolutely exhausted. Most days it would take him 20 to 30 minutes to put his shoes on. Some days it would take him up to 2 hours. And on this particular morning, she simply did not have the emotional or the physical energy to get him ready. So she didn't even ask him if he wanted to go. She got herself ready, she got him situated out in the garden, and then as she was backing out of the driveway, she waved at him, and he kind of looked up and waved back at her half-heartedly. And by the time she got to the end of the driveway, she was feeling guilty. And when she pulled up in front of the church, she was beating herself up, and she thought, I could have gotten some of the big guys to come out and help him. They would have gotten him up the stairs, they would have helped him get on the lift and into the sanctuary, and they would have helped me get him down to the basement afterwards. So she was really feeling guilty and anguished about this when she walked into the sanctuary. And then, on that morning, the minister read a poem in the middle of his sermon, and this poem had been found in the room of a woman who had died, and they didn't find it in her nursing home room. They didn't find it until a few days after the funeral. And this is the poem. The author is unknown. Look at me. What do you see, nurses? What do you see? What are you thinking when you're looking at me? A crabby old woman, not very wise, uncertain of habit, with faraway eyes, who dribbles her food and makes no reply when you say in a loud voice, I do wish you'd try, who seems not to notice the things that you do and is forever losing a stocking or shoe, who resisting or not lets you do as you will with bathing and feeding the long day to fill. Is that what you're thinking? Is that what you see? Then open your eyes, nurse, you're not looking at me. I'll tell you who I am as I sit here so still, as I use at your bidding, as I eat at your will. I'm a small child of 10 with a father and mother, brothers and sisters who love one another. A young girl of 16 with wings on her feet, dreaming soon that a lover she'll meet. A bride soon at 20, my heart gives a leap, remembering the vows that I promised to keep. At 25 now, I have young of my own who need me to guide and secure a happy home. A woman of 30, my young now growing fast, bound to each other with ties that should last. At 40, my young sons have grown and are gone, but my man's beside me to see I don't mourn. At 50, once more babies play round my knee. Again we know children, my loved one and me. Dark days are upon me, my husband is dead. I look at the future, I shudder with dread. For my young are all rearing young of their own, and I think of the years and the love that I've known. I'm now an old woman, and nature is cruel. 'Tis just to make old age look like a fool. The body, it crumbles, grace and vigor depart. There is now a stone where I once had a heart. But inside this carcass a young girl still dwells, and now and again my battered heart swells. I remember the joys, I remember the pain, and I'm loving and living life all over again. I think of the years, all too fast, gone too fast, and I accept the stark fact that nothing can last. So open your eyes, nurse, open and see, not a crabby old woman. Look closer, see me. Well, you can imagine, my mother started crying, and she couldn't shut it off. The man next to her was obviously moved, and he cried so hard without making a sound that the pew shook. So when she went down to the reception after the service, she walked up to Charles Prather, who was the beloved baritone of the church, and she got right up in his face and she said, "Charles, don't you dare sing Happy Anniversary to me." And he said, "But Madelyn, I've already been told by 2 people to do it." And she said, "If you do, I will lose it and I will never get it back." So he didn't. She cried all the way home. She got my dad into the dining room table, sat down, and she cried and she cried and she cried, telling him about this and how guilty she felt and how awful it was. And he said, "I feel like crying too." But he didn't, which surprised me because, as with most stroke survivors, he had a hair-trigger emotional switch. He would cry like a baby over a commercial, or he could be listening to one of his talking books, and if he thought somebody was getting in trouble, he would just sob. So here was my mother sitting there crying her heart out, and he said, "I feel like crying too," but he didn't. And then it was a few years ago, Alex and I were talking, and I said, "Duh, I get it. Of course he didn't cry." He didn't feel the least bit badly that she was that upset, because if she was that upset, guess what? She wasn't going to leave him at home anymore. She was either going to take him with her or she was going to stay there at home with him. So the dictionary defines guilt as a sense of having done something wrong or having failed in an obligation. If you have intentionally inflicted emotional or physical pain on another person, then guilt is an appropriate response. If you have not intentionally inflicted pain on another person, then I would like for you to think about replacing the word guilt with the word regret. There's a huge difference, because when you let go of the personal responsibility of having done something wrong, then you can regret a certain situation. There was a woman in one of my classes, and she said that she felt so guilty. Her mother had Alzheimer's. She felt so guilty that she had to trick her mother into signing the papers that allowed her to sell her house. She had to trick her into signing a durable power of attorney. She had to trick her into getting into the car so that she could check her into a nursing home. She had to trick her into getting in the car to go to her doctor's appointment. She felt guilty about having to trick her into doing everything. So I said, okay, let's just try this. Let's just try a different way of looking at it. What if you said, instead of "I feel guilty about having to trick my mother," "I regret that my mother has Alzheimer's. I regret that I had to trick her into signing the papers to sell her house. I regret that I had to trick her into going to the doctors. I regret that I had to trick her into moving," because everything that she was doing was for the good of her mother. So guilt was not an appropriate reaction. A lot of times when people can grab a hold of this, especially as caregivers, you can feel like you've been let out of prison. So I hope the next time that you are feeling guilty about something, instead of taking that emotion on personally, that you'll say, I regret that, instead of I feel guilty about it. Guilt. What a trip. The dictionary defines guilt as a sense of having done something wrong or having failed in an obligation. I think guilt is a cruel and controlling emotion. And if we're vulnerable to its nasty little tricks, we end up trying too hard, giving too much, and eventually sacrificing our own physical health and mental well-being in our futile effort to satisfy the guilt trippers in our lives who make us feel so crummy. In the next 2 segments, we're going to talk about where guilt comes from and how to get that heavy load off of our backs. Step 1 is awareness. As we go through this first segment, think about the people or the situations that have made you feel guilty. Sometimes we feel guilty because of our actions, things that we did or didn't do. But most often we feel guilty because of the way we feel about something or someone. Now, step 2 may be a bit of a stretch, but I'd like for you to consider the possibility that guilt may or may not be an appropriate emotional response. So, let me ask you this. Who or what is your ball and chain? Are your feelings of guilt self-imposed? Or are they being imposed on you by someone else? Guilt trippers can be very clever. So, how do you know if one has caught you in his lair? Here's a quick test. When something happens to you, ouch, is their primary concern for you and your well-being? Or do they only think of themselves? Here's a hint. If something is happening in your life that takes your focus off of their wants, needs, and happiness, and that upsets them, you're dealing with a guilt tripper. And here's the thing you need to know. They will always put their needs ahead of yours. And why do they do it? Why? Because it works! I'm sorry to tell you this because I'm certain you would like to think otherwise. But people who use guilt to control and manipulate others only care about one thing, and that one thing is getting what they want. And as long as you are willing to do everything for everybody, and you're willing to accept the responsibility for completing an endless list of tasks, they will be happy to let you push that increasingly heavy load up the hill all by yourself. If you're willing to assume the caregiving responsibilities, if you feel obligated to meet all of the needs of your family, including the shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, and being the anytime, anywhere chauffeur, here's a big news flash. They are never going to scream, stop, take a break, take care of yourself. They aren't going to do it. They are going to keep piling it on. Is it because they don't love you or appreciate what you do? No. It's because guilt gets them what they want. It works, and they aren't going to change. Remember when I said guilt was a big bully? It's true. We think if we love enough, do enough, give enough, eventually it will be enough. But it never is. Guilt is greedy. And if you're willing to give every ounce of energy you have, guilt will take it. So what can you do up against such a formidable foe? Well, actually, you have a couple of choices. You can say, stop it. I don't like the way you make me feel, and I'm not going to do this anymore. Or You can keep on going until you collapse. But if you choose that course, I do hope you have someone lined up to take care of you. So, if you would like to control guilt rather than having it control you, let's take step 1 toward developing an attitude of creative indifference toward this big, ugly bully. List the people or situations that have caused you to feel guilty. Write these things down. And then, when we get together on the next segment on guilt, we're going to talk about becoming aware of whether guilt is an appropriate response to your situation. And finally, I'm going to share an amazing secret with you. There's a word, one single word, that changed the way I respond to guilt trippers. This word has been a life changer for me, and I hope it will be for you too. See you soon. Do you hate the way guilt makes you feel? Do you do things you don't want to do just to keep the peace? Would you rather be upset yourself rather than risk having someone else mad at you? If so, you may want to watch this segment, Guilt, Get Lost, You Big Bully, more than once. Ready to get started? Step 1 is to review the people or situations that make you feel guilty. Step 2 is to accept the fact that guilt may or may not be an appropriate response. And the third step is to take action. A good place to start is with determining if you should feel guilty. How do you know if your feelings are appropriate? Well, it's pretty basic. If you intentionally inflict physical or emotional harm on another person, you should feel guilty. In this case, that's an appropriate response. Now, if in a moment of anger or frustration you said something mean or hateful and you hurt someone's feelings and you feel badly about it, apologize. Express your regret, do what you need to do to repair the relationship, and then move on. However, if this wasn't an isolated event, and if you think you might be in a pattern of verbal abuse, or if you have hit, shoved, shaken, or otherwise inflicted physical injury on someone, you need to get help. Anyone who has ever raised children can understand the feelings of rage that lead to child abuse. And anyone who has ever cared for an aging, chronically ill, or disabled person understands elder rage. If you're caring for someone who has Alzheimer's or another dementia-related disease, you may experience this rage with frightening frequency. But feeling is a lot different from acting on it. If you have been, or if you are afraid that you might become abusive with your care receiver, get help immediately. There are people who do understand the difficulty of your situation. Call the national number for Elder Care Locator, 1-800-677-1116. They will connect you with someone who can help you. Now, if your guilt is based more on your feelings than your actions, it may be time to break away from the ball and chain of guilt. Start with acknowledging the fact that you are one person. You are limited in your ability to serve and please others by many factors, including your age, health, financial resources, and the other people in your life, and you're doing the best you can. That said, don't expect the guilt trippers in your life to recognize, appreciate, or go along with that idea. They will want you to stay in line, and they will not be happy if you decide to change the way your relationship has worked in the past. Remember, they're very good at this, so it's going to take some work on your part to change the way you respond to guilt. You might start with examining the guilt you lay on yourself. Stop judging yourself for having negative feelings. I'm sure you've heard people say feelings aren't good or bad, they're just feelings. It's true. Feeling angry and resentful does not make you a bad person. So instead of heaping a load of guilt on yourself for the way you feel, Start giving yourself some credit for your intentions and your actions. A man in one of my seminars said he felt guilty because he hated going to see his mother. He started dreading the visit as soon as he got up in the morning. He went to see her every day in the nursing home at 4 o'clock, knowing that someone would come and get her for dinner at 5 and that then he could get away. I asked the other people in the audience how many of them would feel like they were the luckiest person in the world if they had a son who came to visit every single day at 4 o'clock. And how do you think they responded? Exactly. Every person in the room raised their hand. We all agreed that visiting a person who is sick and doesn't even remember your name can be excruciating. But instead of feeling guilty because he didn't enjoy the visits, we thought he should feel good about his actions. So this is where we start the mind shift. Remember when I promised to share the one word that changed my relationship with guilt? Here it comes. I'm going to ask you to change your emotional vocabulary. I want you to delete the word guilt and replace it with the word regret. This is how guilt feels. You've done something wrong and you feel awful and ashamed. Regret is a feeling of sadness or disappointment about an unfortunate or unpleasant situation. It's what we feel over a lost or missed opportunity. Regret does not imply personal responsibility. It's more a feeling of wishing that things could be different. Let's try a little experiment. See what happens when you delete the word guilt and replace it with the word regret. Ready? Okay, here we go. I regret that I often feel negative and angry toward others. And I regret that sometimes I lose my temper. I regret that I'm okay and my care receiver isn't. I regret that I cannot change, fix, or control their situation. I regret that I resent the time it takes to take care of their needs, and that sometimes I'd really rather be doing something for myself. I regret that I resent the money it takes to provide their care. I regret that sometimes I think about what something is going to cost before I think about how it will benefit my care receiver. I regret that I get tired and I don't always have the energy to attend to their needs. And when I push myself beyond my limits, I regret that I resent them for needing so much. I regret that our relationship has changed, and I regret that my feelings toward my care receiver are not always loving. I regret that I don't enjoy our time together. I regret that it's hard to make conversation. I regret that I look at my watch and often look for excuses to get away because being with them does not bring me any pleasure. I regret that I can't keep promises made in the past. I regret that I made those promises to begin with, and now I'm sad that the situation has progressed to the point that I can't do everything I thought I would be able to do. I regret that there are times I wish it would all just end. I regret that I'm tired of being a caregiver and I want to go on with my life. Yikes, that's a big one. I regret a lot of things, but you know what? I don't do guilt anymore. Okay, take a deep breath. Now I'd like for you to take another good look in the mirror and think about all of the good, kind, and generous things you do to take care of your care receiver. And let me ask you this. How would you feel if someone was doing for you all of the things that you are doing for your care receiver? My guess is you'd be thankful. So recognize and give yourself credit for the good things that you do. And then summon up your courage because you're going to need it. Your guilt trippers are going to get mad. They've been used to getting what they want by using anger and guilt to control you. And when you no longer react the way they want, they are going to pitch a fit. So if you're tired of being treated this way and feeling this way, you will need to develop an attitude of creative indifference toward your guilt tripper. You're going to have to let them be mad. And when you refuse to be intimidated or bullied, when you say, I'm putting a stop to this, when you stand up to anger and guilt and you say, get lost, you big jerks, an amazing thing happens. They lose their power to control you. When you can feel good about all you give, when you can stop feeling guilty for those things you haven't done wrong, and when you can stand up for yourself and stop allowing someone else's anger and feelings of guilt to control you, it's time to throw a party, because that's an accomplishment worth celebrating.